The hospital corridor stretched endlessly before her as Dr. Elena Mitchell reviewed the termination paperwork on her tablet, her heels clicking against the sterile floor with each purposeful step. As chief of surgery at Metropolitan General, she had made difficult decisions before, but none quite like this. The man waiting in her office wasn't just another employee, he was the single father who had saved her reputation 3 months ago when that pharmaceutical scandal nearly destroyed her career, the same man whose tired eyes still managed to sparkle whenever he looked at her across the conference room. And now, standing outside her office door, she could hear his voice through the glass, speaking softly into his phone, "I know, sweetheart. Daddy promises he'll be home for your birthday this time. I promise." Elena's hand froze on the door handle. What nobody knew, what nobody could ever find out, was that she had been secretly investigating him for weeks, not because she suspected wrongdoing, but because she was desperately trying to find any reason not to fire him. And what she discovered changed everything. But before she could process that information, before she could make sense of the confidential file hidden in her desk drawer, the door swung open, and Daniel Reeves stood before her with that disarming smile that made her forget she was supposed to be his boss. "Dr. Mitchell," he said, his voice carrying that familiar warmth mixed with professional respect. "I got your message. Though I have to say, being summoned to the boss's office on a Friday evening usually means one of two things. Either I'm getting a promotion, or you've finally realized you can't live without my exceptional coffee-making skills." Elena felt her resolve waver. This was Daniel, always deflecting tension with humor, always making everyone around him feel at ease while carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. She had watched him for 18 months now, observed how he juggled his demanding role as hospital administrator with raising his 7-year-old daughter alone after his wife passed away from the very disease they treated in this building every day. She had seen him volunteer for extra shifts when others refused, had noticed how he remembered every staff member's birthday, how he brought homemade cookies to the night nurses who worked through holidays. And she had felt something she hadn't experienced in years, something dangerous, something unprofessional, something that made her question every carefully constructed wall she had built around her heart. "Close the door, Daniel," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "And please, sit down." His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. After years of reading patients, of delivering news that changed lives forever, Elena had become an expert at detecting fear masked as calm. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly, his shoulders squared in that protective way she had come to recognize, the posture of a man who had learned to prepare for the worst because life had taught him that the worst often came. "This sounds serious," he said, lowering himself into the chair across from her desk. "Should I be worried? Because I have to tell you, if this is about the coffee machine incident last week, I maintain that the fire alarm was a complete overreaction. The flames were barely visible." Despite everything, Elena felt the corner of her mouth twitch. "It's not about the coffee machine. The unauthorized pizza party for the pediatric ward? Daniel. The time I may or may not have convinced the entire accounting department that Casual Friday included pajamas? Daniel, please." She pressed her palms flat against the desk, needing something solid to anchor her. "I need you to listen to me. What I'm about to say," she paused, her throat constricting around words that felt like betrayal. "The board has made a decision regarding your position." The humor drained from his face. In its place emerged something raw, something vulnerable that made Elena want to reach across the desk and take his hand. But she couldn't. She was his boss. She had responsibilities. She had a hospital to run and a reputation to protect and a heart that had no business feeling the things it felt. "I see," Daniel said quietly. "And I'm guessing by the way you can't quite meet my eyes that this decision wasn't in my favor." Elena forced herself to look at him, really look at him. At the premature gray threading through his dark hair, the laugh lines around his eyes that spoke of a man who chose joy even when sorrow would have been easier, the broad shoulders that carried burdens most people couldn't imagine. She thought about his daughter, Sophie, whom she had met exactly once at the hospital's family day picnic. The little girl had approached her with a dandelion clutched in her tiny fist and said, "My daddy says you're the smartest person he knows. Are you smart enough to make my mommy come back from heaven?" Elena had excused herself to the bathroom and cried for 15 minutes. "The board believes," Elena began, each word feeling like a small death, "that your performance over the past quarter has been unsatisfactory. There have been concerns about your availability, your focus, My focus?" Daniel's voice held an edge now, sharp enough to cut through her carefully prepared speech. "I've given this hospital everything. I've missed dance recitals and parent-teacher conferences and more bedtime stories than I can count. I've answered emails at 2 in the morning while my daughter slept alone in the next room. I've sacrificed." He stopped abruptly, his hands gripping the armrests of the chair. "I'm sorry. That was unprofessional." "No." Elena's voice emerged as barely a whisper. "It was honest. And you deserve honesty, Daniel. You deserve so much more than what I'm about to give you." She stood, moving around the desk until she was close enough to see the faint stubble on his jaw, close enough to smell the coffee and something distinctly him, warm, comforting, dangerous. "You shouldn't be here," she said, and watched confusion cloud his features. "You should go." Daniel rose slowly, his height forcing her to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. They stood there, separated by inches and years of unspoken feelings, by professional boundaries and personal fears, by the ghost of his wife and the fortress around her heart. "Is that what you want?" he asked quietly. "For me to go?" And here's where everything Elena knew about propriety, about professional conduct, about self-preservation should have kicked in. Here's where she should have nodded, handed him the termination paperwork, and wished him well in his future endeavors. Here's where she should have been Dr. Elena Mitchell, chief of surgery, cold and competent and completely in control. Instead, she reached up and began unbuttoning her blazer. Daniel's eyes widened. "Elena, what are you?" "The board didn't make that decision." Her fingers moved to the second button, then the third, revealing the silk blouse beneath. "I made a different one. One that's going to change everything." She took his hand, his warm, capable hand that had held his dying wife's, that braided his daughter's hair every morning, that somehow found the strength to keep reaching for life when death had tried to steal everything. "Come with me." She led him through the connecting door to her private apartment, a small space she kept for nights when surgeries ran long and going home seemed impossible. Daniel followed in stunned silence, his questions written across his face in expressions she had learned to read like surgical notes. "6 months ago," Elena said, still holding his hand as they stood in her dimly lit living room, "someone leaked confidential patient information to a pharmaceutical company. The board launched an investigation. Every administrator was suspected. Including you." Daniel's face paled. "I would never." "I know." She squeezed his hand. "I know you wouldn't. But the evidence was compelling, Daniel. Too compelling. Someone went to great lengths to make you look guilty." "Who?" Elena reached for the zipper at the back of her skirt, not seductively, but practically, the way she might remove any piece of armor after a long battle. Beneath it, she wore running clothes, sneakers already tied, a small backpack waiting by the door that Daniel hadn't noticed until now. "Richard Thornton," she said. "The chairman of the board. He's been embezzling hospital funds for 3 years and using administrative staff as scapegoats. When the pharmaceutical company scandal broke, he saw an opportunity to redirect the investigation. You were the perfect target, new to the executive level, too focused on your daughter to notice the manipulation, trusted by everyone, which meant your fall would deflect all suspicion from him." Daniel stared at her, his mind clearly racing to process this information. "You're saying I was framed?" "I'm saying you were about to become a sacrificial lamb." Elena pulled a flash drive from her blazer pocket. "And I'm saying that for the past 3 months, I've been building a case against Thornton. Every falsified document, every redirected fund, every piece of evidence he planted to destroy you, it's all on here. Why? The word emerged broken, confused. Why would you risk your career, your entire career, for me? Elena's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. Because the day I met you, you were 30 minutes early for your interview. When I asked why, you said you dropped your daughter at school and her classroom hamster had escaped, so you helped her find it before leaving. You were this impressive candidate with this remarkable resume, and you spent your extra interview time chasing a hamster named Mr. Whiskers through a second-grade classroom. She laughed, but the sound was wet, choked. And I thought, this is either the worst administrator I'll ever hire, or the best human being I'll ever meet. Elena. I've been alone for 12 years. The confession spilled from her like blood from a wound, unstoppable once started. I've told myself it's because medicine is my life, because relationships are distractions, because I don't need anyone. But the truth is, I've been terrified. My father left when I was 7. My fiancé left when I was 25. Everyone leaves, Daniel. So I learned to leave first. I learned to push people away before they could hurt me. I learned to be cold and competent and completely closed off because the alternative was too painful to imagine. She was crying now, tears streaming down her cheeks in a way that would have mortified her an hour ago but now felt inevitable, necessary, healing. And then you walked into my hospital with your terrible coffee and your dad jokes and your absolute refusal to treat me like some untouchable authority figure, and she pressed her hand against her chest, against the heart that was beating too fast, too hard. I felt something. For the first time in 12 years, I felt something. Daniel reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a tear from her cheek. You have no idea, he said, his voice rough with emotion, how many nights I've lain awake thinking about you. Telling myself it was inappropriate, impossible, insane. Reminding myself that you're my boss, that you're so far out of my league it's laughable, that the last thing Sophie needs is me dragging her through another heartbreak. What changed your mind? His thumb traced the line of her jaw, gentle as a surgical touch. You did. That day Sophie came to the hospital with the stomach flu because I couldn't find childcare, and you cancelled your board meeting to sit with her in the break room and watch cartoons. You held her hair back when she got sick and told her stories about your pet turtle growing up and taught her how to play gin rummy with coffee stirrers as chips. His voice broke. She asked me that night if you could be her new mommy. Elena's breath caught. Daniel. I told her that wasn't how it worked. That you were Daddy's boss, not Daddy's. He stopped, the word hanging unspoken between them. But the truth is, I've been falling for you since the day you hired me. Every meeting, every accidental hallway encounter, every late night when we were the only two people left in the building and you'd pretend you didn't need dinner but your stomach would growl so loud I could hear it from 3 offices away. Despite everything, Elena laughed. It's a medical condition. It's adorable. He stepped closer, and suddenly the space between them felt charged with electricity, with possibility, with all the things they'd been denying themselves. But I need you to understand something. I'm not the kind of man who does anything halfway. If I'm in, I'm all in. Sophie, the chaos, the dance recitals and the homework battles and the nightmares about her mom, that's my life. That's the package. And I know it's a lot to ask of anyone, especially someone who... Elena kissed him. It wasn't planned, wasn't calculated, wasn't anything like the careful, controlled approach she applied to every other aspect of her existence. It was desperate and messy and perfect, his hands tangling in her hair while her fingers gripped the front of his shirt like he was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly tilted on its axis. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Daniel pressed his forehead against hers. So, he said, that familiar humor threading through his voice despite the intensity of the moment, should I take that as a positive performance review? Elena laughed, really laughed, the sound echoing through her small apartment like music she'd forgotten how to play. Your performance has been exemplary, Mr. Reeves. However, there's one area where I think you could use some additional training. Oh? His eyebrow raised. And what area would that be? She took his hand again, leading him toward the bedroom door that had been firmly closed for so long she'd almost forgotten it existed. The work-life balance portion of your evaluation. I believe you've been severely neglecting your personal needs. That's a serious accusation, Dr. Mitchell. I take my responsibilities as your supervisor very seriously. But just as her fingers touched the bedroom door handle, her phone buzzed violently in her blazer pocket. Then again. Then a third time with the specific rhythm of an emergency notification. Elena's medical instincts overrode everything else. She pulled out the phone, and her face went white. What? Daniel asked immediately. What is it? It's Sophie. Elena's voice was barely audible. She's in the ER. Daniel, she's at our hospital. Everything that had been building between them, the tension, the revelation, the promise of something more, evaporated in an instant. Daniel was already moving toward the door, his face transformed into something she recognized from her years of practice, the raw, primal fear of a parent whose child is in danger. What happened? He demanded. Why is she was supposed to be at my neighbor's house. Mrs. Patterson was watching her while I don't know. Elena was already changing back into her blazer, her medical persona snapping into place like armor. But the message is from Dr. Peters in pediatric emergency. She knows Sophie. She wouldn't have contacted me unless. They ran. The elevator ride down to the emergency department felt endless, neither of them speaking, both trapped in their private terrors. Elena watched Daniel's hands shake at his sides and wanted to hold them, to tell him everything would be okay, but she had made promises like that before. She had seen them break. The ER was controlled chaos when they burst through the doors, nurses moving with purpose, monitors beeping their constant vigilance, the smell of antiseptic and fear that Elena had lived with for so long it barely registered anymore. But tonight it smelled different. Tonight it smelled like the potential loss of everything she hadn't even realized she wanted. Dr. Jessica Peters met them at the nurses' station, her face professionally calm but her eyes telegraphing concern. Daniel. Dr. Mitchell. She nodded at each of them, not questioning why the chief of surgery had arrived alongside an administrator for a non-life-threatening case. Sophie's in exam room 4. She's stable, but there's been an incident. What kind of incident? Daniel's voice was steady, but Elena could see the tendons in his neck straining with the effort of maintaining control. Mrs. Patterson brought her in about an hour ago. Apparently Sophie complained of severe headaches at school today, then again this evening. She collapsed at Mrs. Patterson's house. She was conscious when she arrived, but she's been experiencing some disorientation, and we've noticed, Dr. Peters hesitated. We've noticed some concerning symptoms that we need to discuss. Daniel pushed past her toward exam room 4, and Elena followed, her mind already racing through possibilities. Pediatric cases weren't her specialty, but she knew enough. Severe headaches, collapse, disorientation, the differential diagnosis was terrifying. Meningitis. Brain tumor. Aneurysm. Her training ticked through each option like a grim checklist while her heart, her foolish newly awakened heart, screamed that this couldn't be happening. Sophie lay in the hospital bed looking impossibly small, her blonde curls spread across the pillow, her face pale beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. She was awake, though, her eyes brightening when she saw her father. Daddy. She tried to sit up, and a nurse gently pressed her back down. Daddy, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause trouble. I told Mrs. Patterson I was fine, but then the room got all spinny and... Daniel was at her bedside in an instant, gathering her small hand in both of his, pressing kisses to her forehead. Shoo, sweetheart. It's okay. You're okay. Daddy's here now. Elena hung back, suddenly uncertain of her place in this moment. She was Daniel's boss. She was the chief of surgery. She was the woman who had been about to cross a line from which there was no return, and now she was watching a little girl who might be seriously ill while feeling things she had no right to feel. "Dr. Mitchell?" Sophie's voice, small and confused, cut through her spiraling thoughts. "You're here too?" Elena moved to the other side of the bed, her professional calm settling over her like a familiar coat. "I'm here, Sophie. We're going to take very good care of you, okay? Are you going to hold my hair back again if I throw up?" Sophie asked, and despite everything, Elena felt a watery smile tug at her lips. "If you need me to, absolutely." Dr. Peters cleared her throat from the doorway. "Daniel, Dr. Mitchell, could I speak with you both outside for a moment?" The walk to the consultation room felt like a death march. Elena had made this walk before, on the other side, as the doctor who had to deliver news that would shatter lives. But she had never made it as, whatever she was now. Invested. Terrified. Falling in love with a man whose daughter might be dying. "We've run preliminary tests," Dr. Peters said once the door closed behind them. "Blood work, CT scan, a basic neurological workup. The good news is that we've ruled out the most severe possibilities, no signs of hemorrhage, no tumor, no infection." Daniel's exhale was audible. Then what? The CT did show something, though. Dr. Peters pulled up an image on the room's computer screen. "There's a congenital defect in one of Sophie's cerebral blood vessels. It's called an arteriovenous malformation, an AVM. It's been there since birth, but it's grown to a point where it's now causing symptoms." Elena studied the scan, her surgical mind automatically assessing. The AVM was sizable but located in a relatively accessible area. Operable. Dangerous, but operable. "What does this mean?" Daniel asked. He couldn't finish the question. "She needs surgery," Dr. Peters said gently. "The AVM has to be addressed before it causes a more serious event. Left untreated, there's a significant risk of rupture, which could cause a massive stroke." "Surgery." Daniel's voice was hollow. "Brain surgery. On my 7-year-old daughter. It's her best option, Daniel. Her only option, really, for any kind of normal life going forward." Elena watched Daniel's face crumble, then rebuild itself, the architecture of his pain-constructing walls to hold back the flood. She recognized it, had done it herself, 1,000 times. But watching it happen to him, to this man who had just held her face in his hands and looked at her like she was something precious, felt like her own heart breaking. "Who's the best?" Daniel asked. "I don't care about cost or wait times or logistics. Who is the best neurosurgeon for pediatric AVM resection?" Dr. Peters and Elena exchanged a look. "You're looking at her," Dr. Peters said quietly. Daniel's head snapped toward Elena. "What?" "I did my fellowship in pediatric neurosurgery," Elena said, her voice carefully neutral. "Before I transitioned to administration and general surgery oversight. AVMs were my specialty. I published 12 papers on the subject. I developed a technique that reduced surgical complications by 40%. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I haven't operated in 3 years." The words tasted like failure. After a patient, a little boy, 8 years old, she stopped, the memory still raw enough to draw blood. I couldn't risk it anymore. The responsibility, the fear. I stepped back. I told myself administration was where I could do the most good, overseeing others, making systemic changes. But the truth is, I was terrified. I'm still terrified. "So you're saying you could save my daughter?" Daniel's voice was strange, caught between hope and accusation. "You have the skills to save her, but you won't?" "I'm saying," Elena's throat closed around the words. "I'm saying I don't know if I trust myself anymore. And your daughter's life isn't something I'm willing to gamble with. But someone else's hands, someone else's training, that you're willing to gamble with? The silence between them was devastating. I'll consult with Dr. Harrison at University Hospital, Elena finally said. He trained under me. He's excellent. I want you. Elena blinked. Daniel, I just explained. I know what you explained. You're scared. You lost a patient and it broke something in you and you've been hiding from it ever since. I get it. I really do. He stepped closer, and she could see the tears he was barely holding back. But Elena, I have spent the last 18 months watching you. I have seen you face down board members and pharmaceutical companies and ego-driven surgeons who thought they could intimidate you. I have seen you advocate for patients that everyone else had given up on. I have seen you hold my daughter's hand while she cried for her mother and tell her stories that made her laugh. His hands found hers, gripping tight enough to anchor. I don't know what happened 3 years ago. I don't know what that little boy meant to you or how it feels to carry that weight. But I know that if Sophie is going to have her head opened up and her brain operated on, I want it to be done by someone who will treat her like she's the most important person in the world. I want it to be done by someone who loves her. Elena's breath caught. Daniel, I don't. You do. His voice was certain, breaking. You might not know it yet, but you do. I've seen it. The way you look at her, the way you remember her favorite color and that she's allergic to strawberries and that she cries when she watches the end of Charlotte's Web. You've been falling in love with her too, Elena. And I think, he paused, raw and exposed. I think you've been falling in love with me. The monitors beeped in the distance. Footsteps passed in the hallway. Somewhere in this building, lives were beginning and ending, and Elena Mitchell stood at the crossroads of her own existence, facing a choice that would define everything that came after. If I do this, she said slowly, if I operate, there are no guarantees. You understand that. Even with perfect technique, even with everything going right, there's always a risk. I know. And if something goes wrong, her voice cracked. If I lose her on that table, I don't know if I could survive it. I don't know if we could survive it. Daniel lifted their joined hands and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. Then we make sure we don't lose her. We throw everything we have at this, every resource, every prayer, every ounce of love we've been trying to pretend doesn't exist. And we fight for her together. Elena looked at this man, this beautiful, broken, impossibly brave man who had already lost so much and was still choosing hope, and felt something shift inside her. The walls she had spent 12 years building didn't crumble, they transformed. They became foundations instead of barriers, structures that could hold something new instead of keeping everything out. Together, she repeated. He kissed her then, softly, a promise rather than a passion. Together. The next 3 days were a blur of preparation. Elena threw herself into surgical planning with an intensity she hadn't felt in years, reviewing Sophie's scans until she could map the AVM with her eyes closed, consulting with Dr. Harrison and 2 other specialists who confirmed what she already knew, she was still the best person for this job. Daniel split his time between Sophie's bedside and working with Elena to expose Richard Thornton, a task that suddenly seemed less urgent than it had before but still necessary for protecting their future. Sophie, for her part, handled the situation with the remarkable resilience that children sometimes display. She asked questions, hard ones, about whether surgery hurt and what would happen if something went wrong and would she still be herself afterward. Elena answered every one honestly, kneeling beside the hospital bed and holding the small hand that had become incredibly precious to her. Dr. Mitchell? Sophie asked on the night before surgery, when Daniel had stepped out to make a phone call and the room was quiet with anticipation. Yes, sweetheart. If I die tomorrow, will you take care of my daddy? Elena's heart stopped. Sophie. He pretends he's okay, but he's not. The little girl's eyes were too wise for her 7 years. After Mommy died, he used to cry in the shower so I wouldn't hear. He thought he was being quiet, but I could still hear. And lately, since he started talking about you, he doesn't cry as much. Elena blinked back tears. You know about me? He says your name in his sleep sometimes. Sophie grinned, a flash of mischief that reminded Elena she was still a child, despite everything. And he gets this goofy look on his face when he comes home from work and I ask about his day. He only got that look with mommy before. Sophie, listen to me. Elena leaned closer, cupping the girl's face in her hands. I am going to do everything in my power to make sure you come through tomorrow healthy and strong. But I need you to promise me something too. What? I need you to promise that you'll keep fighting. No matter what happens in that operating room, no matter how scary it gets, you keep fighting to come back to your daddy. And to me. Sophie's eyes widened. To you? I'm not going anywhere, Sophie. Whatever happens between your father and me, whatever we are or become, I'm in your life now. If you'll have me. The little girl threw her arms around Elena's neck with surprising strength. I wished for you, she whispered. On my birthday candles. I wished for someone to love my daddy again, so he wouldn't be so sad. And then you came. Elena held her, this precious child who had somehow opened doors she thought were permanently locked, and felt tears streaming down her face without shame. I'm going to take that as a very good sign, she managed. Daniel found them like that when he returned, Sophie asleep with her head on Elena's shoulder, Elena stroking her hair and humming a lullaby she had learned from her own mother decades ago. She's out, Elena whispered, carefully extracting herself and laying Sophie back against the pillows. Daniel watched his daughter sleep, his expression a mixture of terror and tenderness. I used to wonder if I'd ever feel this scared again. After losing Rebecca, I thought, nothing could ever compare to that fear, watching someone you love slip away. But this. He shook his head. This is different. This is my child. I know. Do you? He turned to face her, and the vulnerability in his eyes was staggering. Can you possibly understand what it means to trust someone with the most important person in your world? Elena thought about her answer carefully. I understand what it means to have someone trust you with their most important person. And I understand the weight of that responsibility. It's what drove me away from surgery in the first place, not being able to bear it when that trust was broken. Will you tell me about him? The boy you lost? She hadn't talked about Marcus with his gap-toothed smile and his obsession with dinosaurs and his brave attempts not to cry when the needles came out, in 3 years. But standing in this hospital room with Daniel and his sleeping daughter, she found the words coming easier than expected. His name was Marcus. He was 8 years old, and he had an AVM almost identical to Sophie's, same location, same size, same surgical approach. His mother had the same look in her eyes that you have now, that desperate hope mixed with impossible fear. Elena's voice was steady, clinical, a protective mechanism. The surgery went perfectly. Every step by the book. I was so confident, so sure that we had beaten it. What happened? Post-operative hemorrhage. Rare, unpredictable, almost always fatal. He died 16 hours after surgery, while I was at home sleeping, thinking I had saved him. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. That wasn't your fault. I know that. Intellectually, I know that. But fault and responsibility are different things. I was responsible for him. I opened his skull and operated on his brain and told his mother that I would take care of her child. And then I didn't. I couldn't. Elena's clinical facade finally cracked. I've been hiding ever since. Telling myself I was being responsible by stepping back, by letting others take the risks I couldn't face. But the truth is, I was a coward. No. Daniel's hands found her shoulders, turning her to face him fully. You were human. You experienced something traumatic and you responded the only way you knew how. That's not cowardice, that's survival. And tomorrow? What is it when I pick up a scalpel and cut into your daughter's brain knowing that I might lose her the same way? That's courage. His voice was fierce. That's extraordinary, terrifying, life-changing courage. And whatever happens tomorrow, I need you to know, I don't blame you. I won't blame you. Whether Sophie comes through this perfectly or whether, he couldn't finish the sentence. Whatever happens, I chose you. I trusted you. And I'll never regret that. They held each other in the dim hospital room, two broken people who had somehow found their jagged edges fit together, while a little girl slept and dreamed of birthdays and butterflies and mothers who watched from heaven. The morning of the surgery dawned gray and cold, the kind of winter day that makes the world feel suspended between states. Elena had spent the night in her on-call room, running through the procedure in her mind, visualizing every step until she could perform it blindfolded. She had eaten a protein-heavy breakfast despite her complete lack of appetite. She had done everything right. And still, walking into the scrub room, she felt her hands shake. "Dr. Mitchell?" A voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. Dr. Peters stood in the doorway, concern evident in her expression. "The patient's father is asking to see you. Before surgery." Elena nodded, turning off the water and drying her hands. She found Daniel in the pre-op waiting area, his face pale but composed, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee he hadn't touched. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey yourself." He attempted a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "How are you feeling?" "I should be asking you that." "I'm terrified," he admitted. "But I know this sounds crazy, I'm also hopeful. Because I believe in you, Elena. I believe in us." She took his hand, not caring who might see, not caring about professional boundaries or hospital politics or any of the things that had seemed so important a week ago. "When Sophie wakes up," she said, "and she will wake up, I want to be there. Not as her surgeon. Not as your boss. As someone who cares about her. About both of you." "When she wakes up," Daniel repeated, making it a promise. "We'll be waiting. Together. Together." One final kiss, quick, fierce, desperate with hope, and then Elena walked away. Toward the operating room. Toward the biggest challenge of her career. Toward a future she hadn't known she wanted until it was almost too late. The surgery lasted 6 hours. 6 hours of impossible concentration, of navigating between blood vessels thinner than human hairs, of resecting tissue while preserving the architecture of a little girl's brain. Elena's team worked in seamless coordination, anticipating needs before they were voiced, adjusting for complications before they became crises. And through it all, Elena operated with a clarity she hadn't felt in years, not despite her fear, but because of it. Because this mattered. Because Sophie mattered. Because love, she was discovering, didn't make you weak. It made you powerful. "Final resection complete," she announced, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "Let's close her up and get her to recovery." The applause in the OR was subdued. They weren't out of the woods yet, but Elena could feel the shift in the room, the collective exhale of held breath. She found Daniel in the surgical waiting room, red-eyed and haggard, surrounded by empty coffee cups and untouched sandwiches. He jumped to his feet when he saw her, his face a question mark of terror and hope. "She's stable," Elena said, and watched his knees buckle. She caught him, supporting his weight as sobs racked his body. "She's going to be okay, Daniel. She came through beautifully. She's okay." He was crying openly now, clinging to her surgical gown without regard for sterility. "My baby's okay. Your baby is amazing. She's strong and resilient and she's going to wake up demanding ice cream and asking when she can go back to school." Elena was crying too, she realized, tears streaming down her face beneath her surgical cap. "She's going to have an incredible life, Daniel. I really believe that." They held each other in the waiting room, surrounded by worried families and buzzing vending machines and the constant undercurrent of hospital sound, and Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in so long she'd forgotten its name: peace. Sophie woke up 12 hours later, groggy and confused but unmistakably herself. "Daddy?" Her voice was small, scratchy from intubation. "Did I miss my birthday?" Daniel laughed, the sound wet and broken and perfect. "Your birthday isn't for 2 more weeks, sweetheart. You've got plenty of time." "Good." Sophie's eyes drifted to Elena, who stood at the foot of the bed trying to maintain professional distance and failing spectacularly. "Dr. Mitchell? Did you fix my brain?" "I did my best," Elena said, moving closer. "How do you feel?" "Fuzzy. Like when Daddy lets me stay up too late watching movies." Sophie reached out her hand, and Elena took it automatically. "Are you going to be my new mommy now?" The question hung in the air, enormous and terrifying and wonderful. Daniel looked at Elena. Elena looked at Daniel. "We're going to take things one step at a time," Elena said carefully. "But I'm going to be around a lot, if that's okay with you." "More than okay." Sophie's smile was sleepy but radiant. "I wished for you, remember? And birthday wishes are serious business." Over the following weeks, Sophie recovered with the remarkable resilience of the young. Physical therapy, cognitive assessments, regular checkups, she approached each challenge with determination and humor that reminded Elena so much of Daniel it made her chest ache. And through it all, Elena was there. Not as a surgeon, not as an administrator, but as something she had never imagined herself being, part of a family. Richard Thornton was arrested 3 weeks after Sophie's surgery, caught in a web of evidence that Elena and Daniel had carefully constructed. The hospital board issued a formal apology to Daniel, along with a promotion and a substantial raise that he used to pay off medical bills and start a college fund for Sophie. Elena was offered the position of CEO, which she declined in favor of returning to surgery, specifically, pediatric neurosurgery, where she could use her skills to save children like the one who had taught her how to love again. It was Sophie who proposed first. 6 months after her surgery, fully recovered and back to her normal routine of dance class and homework battles and elaborate plots to convince her father to get a puppy, she approached Elena with the solemnity of a child on a mission. "I've been thinking," Sophie announced, climbing onto Elena's lap as they sat on the back porch of Daniel's house, their house now, Elena having moved in 2 months prior. "And I've decided that you should marry my daddy." Elena choked on her coffee. "Oh, you've decided that, have you?" "Yes. Because you love him, and he loves you, and I love both of you, and that's what families do. They get married and live together and have arguments about whose turn it is to do dishes." "Those are excellent points." Elena set down her coffee cup, giving Sophie her full attention. "Does your father know about this plan?" "I made him practice." Sophie pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket. "He wrote a speech and everything. But he's too scared to give it, so I'm doing it for him." "Sophie," Daniel's voice came from inside the house, and then he appeared in the doorway, his face a mixture of mortification and affection. "We talked about this. I was going to ask her myself. You were taking too long." Sophie crossed her arms. "I've been waiting forever." Elena looked between them, this man who had taught her that vulnerability wasn't weakness, and this girl who had shown her that opening your heart didn't have to mean pain, and felt tears threatening again. She had cried more in the past 6 months than in the previous 12 years combined, and somehow, she didn't mind. "Yes," she said. Daniel froze. "Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll be Sophie's." She paused, glancing at the little girl. "What do you want me to be? Stepmom? Elena? Something else?" "Mom," Sophie said immediately. "If that's okay. I'll never forget my first mommy, but she told me once that hearts can get bigger to fit more love. And my heart is really big now." Elena gathered her close, pressing kisses to blonde curls that smelled like strawberry shampoo. "Mom, it is." Daniel crossed the porch in 2 steps, dropping to his knees before both of them and producing a ring that Elena had somehow failed to notice him carrying. "I had a whole speech planned. About how you saved my daughter's life and my life and how I can't imagine spending another day without you. About how falling in love with you was the bravest thing I've ever done and the best thing that ever happened to me." It was a really good speech, Sophie confirmed. He practiced in front of the mirror. "A lot. But I think Sophie summed it up better than I could." Daniel slid the ring onto Elena's finger, a simple diamond flanked by 2 small sapphires, Sophie's birthstone. "We love you. We want you to be ours. Will you?" Elena looked at the ring on her finger, at the little girl in her arms, at the man kneeling before her with his heart in his eyes, and felt the last of her walls transform into something else entirely. Not barriers, but bridges. Connections. Home. "I already am," she said. The wedding took place on a warm spring day in the hospital garden where Sophie had once presented Elena with a dandelion. It was small, just close friends and colleagues who had watched their story unfold, but it was perfect. Sophie served as flower girl and ring bearer and officiant in training, having convinced the actual officiant to let her read a poem she had written about love and brain surgery and getting wishes granted. As Elena walked down the aisle toward Daniel, she thought about all the moments that had led to this one. The fear and the pain and the years of self-imposed isolation. The little boy she had lost and the little girl she had saved. The walls she had built and the man who had shown her how to tear them down. She thought about what it meant to choose hope when fear was easier, to choose love when loneliness was safer, to choose family when she had spent her whole life convinced she was meant to be alone. And she thought about how sometimes, the most terrifying moments of our lives lead us exactly where we need to be. "I love you," she whispered as she reached Daniel's side. "I love you too," he whispered back. "Thanks for being brave enough to let me." After the ceremony, after the dancing and the cake and Sophie's elaborate toast that involved thanking both her parents and Mr. Whiskers the classroom hamster for playing an essential role in their love story, Elena and Daniel stood on the hospital rooftop watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. "No regrets?" Daniel asked, his arm around her waist. Elena leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her back. "Only that I waited so long to let myself feel this. You weren't ready before." "Maybe not. But I'm ready now." She turned in his arms, facing him fully. "I spent 12 years being afraid, afraid of loss, afraid of love, afraid of wanting something I might not get to keep. And then I met you, and I met Sophie, and I realized that the opposite of fear isn't courage. It's connection. It's letting someone matter so much that their pain becomes your pain and their joy becomes your joy and their life becomes inseparable from your own." "That sounds terrifying," Daniel said, but he was smiling. "It is." Elena kissed him softly. "It's the most terrifying thing I've ever done. And I wouldn't trade it for anything." From the garden below, Sophie's voice drifted up, "Daddy." "Elena. The photographer wants to take more pictures. And I want more cake." They laughed, pulling apart but keeping their hands intertwined. "Ready to go be a family?" Daniel asked. Elena looked at him, this man who had walked into her hospital with terrible coffee-making skills and a broken heart, who had shown her that strength and vulnerability could coexist, who had trusted her with his daughter's life and his own heart. "I've never been more ready for anything," she said. And together, they walked back down to their daughter, to their future, to the life that fear had almost prevented and love had made possible. The months that followed were not perfect, no life ever is. There were arguments about parenting styles and work-life balance, moments when old fears crept back in and had to be gently addressed. There were new challenges, Sophie's first nightmare about hospitals, Daniel's struggle to accept help after years of doing everything alone, Elena's learning curve as she figured out how to be a mother. But there was also joy, profound, everyday joy that Elena had never known existed. Pancake breakfasts where Sophie covered every surface in batter. Lazy Sunday afternoons watching movies in pillow forts. Bedtime stories that always ran long because Sophie had inherited her father's talent for stalling. Dance recitals and parent-teacher conferences and the 1,000 small moments that make up a life lived together. And there was love, steady, growing, transformative love that proved every day that Elena's walls had not protected her but imprisoned her. One night, a year after the wedding, Elena sat on the edge of Sophie's bed, tucking her in for what had become their nightly ritual. "Elena?" Sophie's voice was sleepy. "Mom, I mean." "Yes, sweetheart. I'm glad my brain was broken." At Elena's startled expression, Sophie continued, "Because if it wasn't broken, you wouldn't have fixed it. And if you hadn't fixed it, you might never have married Daddy. And then I wouldn't have you." Elena brushed hair from Sophie's forehead, her heart so full it hurt. "Your brain was never broken, Sophie. It just needed some help. Like all of us do, sometimes. Like Daddy's heart? Like Daddy's heart. And like mine." Sophie smiled, already drifting toward sleep. "I'm glad we could all help each other." Elena kissed her forehead, lingering in the doorway as she watched her daughter, sleep. In the hall, Daniel waited, his silhouette familiar and beloved. "She okay?" he asked. "She's perfect." Elena took his hand. "We're perfect." Daniel pulled her close, and they stood together in the quiet hallway of their home, listening to the sounds of a life they had built together. "Thank you," he murmured against her hair. "For what?" "For being brave. For choosing us. For letting yourself be loved." Elena thought about all the years she had spent alone, convinced that isolation was safety, that independence was strength. She thought about the walls she had built and the man who had refused to accept them, who had seen the person behind the armor and decided she was worth fighting for. "Thank you for not giving up," she said. "When I pushed you away, when I told myself you deserved better, when I was so scared I could barely breathe, you stayed. You waited. You believed in something I couldn't see. I could see it." Daniel tilted her chin up, meeting her eyes. "From the very beginning, I could see who you really were. Not the cold, untouchable surgeon everyone else saw. But the woman who helped second graders find escaped hamsters. The woman who held my daughter's hand when she cried. The woman who was so full of love she had to hide it behind walls just to function." He kissed her softly. "I always knew who you were, Elena. I was just waiting for you to know it too." They stood there, in the hallway of the life they had built, and Elena felt finally, completely, irrevocably home. Sometimes the greatest love stories don't begin with grand gestures or obvious compatibility. Sometimes they begin with fear, fear of loss, fear of connection, fear of wanting something that might be taken away. And sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is let that fear be transformed by hope. Elena had spent years protecting herself from pain, never realizing that in doing so, she was also protecting herself from joy. It took a single father with a sense of humor, a 7-year-old with a serious wish, and a crisis that brought them all together to teach her that love isn't the absence of fear, it's the presence of something greater. So if you're watching this and feeling like the walls you've built are too high to climb over, like the fears you carry are too heavy to set down, like love is something that happens to other people but not to you, please know that your story isn't over. The moments that scare us the most are often the doorways to the lives we're meant to live. And sometimes, the person who will change everything walks into your office on a Friday evening, armed with nothing but terrible jokes and a heart brave enough to keep loving even after loss. Choose hope. Choose connection. Choose the terrifying, beautiful vulnerability of letting someone matter. And know that somewhere, a surgeon who once built the highest walls learned to tear them down. A little girl who wished on birthday candles got everything she asked for. And a man who thought he would never love again found that hearts, like Sophie said, can always grow bigger. I hope this story touched your heart the way telling it touched mine. If you felt something watching this, if you cried or smiled or thought about someone you love, I would be so grateful if you could hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. Your support helps me create more stories about the transformative power of love, courage, and human connection. And please, share this with someone who needs to hear that their walls can become bridges and their fears can become foundations for something beautiful. I would love to know where you're watching from today. Drop a comment below with your country. It always amazes me how stories can connect us across borders and oceans and the vast geography of human experience. We're all, in the end, just people learning how to love each other. And that's a journey worth taking together.